Filipe! Gurnie, Dragane! Dragane! Filipe, prođi! Jao, ne radiš ono što sam ti rekao, jebiti lebac krvavi. Pa prođi, nemoj igrati!
Evo ga!
Dragane! Dragane! Prođi! Dragane!
Greetings, temple people. Arhon Okval. Oh, you gotta be fucking shitting me. Yeah, come on, there's more where that came from. Yeah! China. Arhon Okval's here. The temple is now open. In today's video, we'll be exploring the pinnacle of Slavjank that offers an experience and atmosphere like no other game. Today, the temple proudly hosts S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Call of Pripyat. Now, I know this is the third installment in the series, and some of you might feel I'm doing the other two a dishonor by not including them. However, I truly believe that Call of Pripyat is the most balanced experience in the series, offering some of the best bits from the first two games and a bit of its own unique flavor. In my opinion, it is best to try Call of Pripyat first, and then if you like it, try the other games. I'm fairly certain if you like Call of Pripyat, you'll also like the insane gunfights of Clear Sky and the gloomy horror of Shadow of Chernobyl. Now, as for Call of Pripyat, I'd like to show you how optimizing the mystery of the setting and the way your audience interacts with it can lead to an unforgettable experience that forms a long-term fandom.
Did you hear that? Never mind. I must be hearing things.
If you stick to the end of the video, you will become a creator who can make a proper mysterious setting, or an audience member who can tell the difference between proper immersion and pure BS. So without further ado, let's load up on that Slavic cuisine, check our gear, and get lost in the zone. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Balkan Socialized Healthcare, but we just call it BS.
You're a touch pale, buddy. How about a little injection or two? Next. Take care and stay healthy.
Let's start with S.T.A.L.K.E.R's greatest strength, its setting. For the people who are not familiar, let's start with an easy example. Think of your hometown city or village, more specifically its outskirts. At this edge of civilization, is there an abandoned building or grove that's rarely visited by anyone? Maybe it even has some dark history of murder or occult happenings. And yet, despite these characteristics, a few people still go there to hang out. Maybe you and your friends fall into this group of people. Even though the place is kind of creepy, especially at night, you are still mesmerized by it. It allows you to calm down, disconnect, and reflect. If you are there with a group of people, ideally around a campfire, it feels so cozy and right despite the gloomy surroundings. After spending enough time in this place, you become addicted to the otherworldly feeling you get when visiting it. Every time you come back to visit your hometown, this place is often the first visit after seeing your family. Addicted to the otherworldly feeling is a sentence that perfectly describes what keeps the S.T.A.L.K.E.R community and IP alive and well after all these years. Everything I just described can be found and felt in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, or as we stalkers lovingly call it, the zone. With the example out of the way, let's get to the definition. The unknown zone is an area within a world of a book, TV series, or game that is isolated from the rest of the world. Accompanying this isolation is a unique feeling that can be experienced only if one visits this area. Although some of its aspects are known to the local populace, the major reason for why this zone exists and how it operates remains unknown. If properly implemented, the unknown zone can turn a creator's work into an unforgettable classic that can persist even after he stops working on it. The reason is simple. An unknown zone naturally generates debate among fans, and as we like to say at the Temple, debates about the lore and story are the lifeblood of a franchise. However, even amongst the unknown zones in fiction, the zone from S.T.A.L.K.E.R stands out as unique. The secret to this formula is the masterful connection GSC game world established between the real-world Chernobyl exclusion zone and their own setting. In both our world and the S.T.A.L.K.E.R universe, the 1986 nuclear disaster happened because people who won participation trophies were put in charge of a nuclear power plant. In both universes, a 30-kilometer exclusion zone was established to keep people out because of the radiation. However, the timeline splits at what the Soviet government decided to do with the exclusion zone. At least I hope it does. You see, in the S.T.A.L.K.E.R universe, the Soviet government found the isolated exclusion zone to be the perfect place to perform all kinds of fun experiments. From testing the effects of radiation on humans, to even messing with the very sphere of human consciousness that surrounds our planet, aptly named the noosphere. Not heeding the fact that no is literally in the name, the scientists continued their experiments on the noosphere, safe from the prying eyes of the outside world. On June 10, 2006, the price for messing with higher powers was paid. A flash of blinding light lit up the exclusion zone, followed by the evaporation of clouds and an eerie silence. Then came a terrifying roar, followed by tremors in the earth. The soldiers guarding the perimeter were killed instantly. A year later, both the government and the scientists had no idea what happened. Expeditions into the zone ended in tragedy, and a few who returned told stories of mutated beasts with unnatural abilities. The call of the zone could now be heard loud and clear. This call was answered by scavengers, trespassers, adventurers, loners, killers, explorers, and robbers. Stalkers. However, the mysterious allure of the zone is not the sole reason for the stalkers' presence there. In the aftermath of whatever happened in 2006, anomalous formations called artifacts began to form in various places in the zone. These artifacts possessed supernatural characteristics, which made them invaluable to both scientists within the zone and outside it. Naturally, this made the stalker phenomenon only grow in size, and by 2010 they had a firm presence in the zone with several factions. So, to sum it all up, the otherworldly allure of the zone, coupled with the financial potential of the artifact market, gives a clear, logical reason for why people are in the zone. There is no need to suspend disbelief here due to video game logic. Oh my god, stop charging, why are you giving up a perfectly good defensive position? If a place like the zone existed in our world, you better believe there would be people who would uproot their entire lives just to go there. The proof is in the many stalker-inspired groups of tourists that visit the zone, dressed in stalker gear. So apart from the connection the stalker zone has to its real-life counterpart, its believability in spite of its supernatural elements is what sets it apart from other unknown zones in fiction. Now that we understand the call of the zone, let's see how creators can recreate it. So the great news is that the setup for an unknown zone in your world is quite simple. It has to somehow be separated from the rest of the world. It has to have its own rules for how certain aspects of reality function there. Finally, it needs to have an ongoing mystery behind its existence that keeps debate among both the denizens of your world and your fans alive and well. Bonus points for making the reason people come to this place believable. It's not enough to just go, "Oh, it's a spooky haunted place where monsters kill everything." Why are people then coming to this place if the fatality rate is like 99%? No, the much better and more believable approach is to follow the Stalker Zone example. The zone in Stalker is just hostile enough to trigger that risk-taking side in mortals, but not so hostile that basically it's impossible for communities to exist there. The reward has to at least be perceived as greater than the risk. Speaking of rewards, whether it's a game, book, or TV series, make sure that your characters have something to gain from this place. A wish, powerful artifacts, some kind of portal to an unknown dimension, whatever fits the story best. Finally, if possible, follow Stalker's example and link your unknown zone to our world somehow. It can be just an alternate version of a place that already exists, or even a new place that you added to our world. The reason this is important is because, in my opinion, the best escapist fantasy is actually one that is closest to home. In other words, easier to approach. If the unknown zone is set in a world you created, you can at least make some parallel with our world. Let's say a zone devastated by a magical accident as a metaphor for nuclear fallout. Now let's get a bit more specific based on what type of creator we're talking about. Game designers and screenwriters, given that you have the advantage of visuals and audio, you're up first. Gloom. Gloom is your friend. No matter what type of unknown zone you are trying to pull off, you can't go wrong with gloom. When people imagine any kind of mysterious or ominous place, 99% of the time it's some kind of gloomy, very likely ruined place. Both S.T.A.L.K.E.R and Gothic have an element of darkness in their formula, which gives both striking visuals that are memorable to fans. However, I think S.T.A.L.K.E.R does a much better job at presenting this gloom. Wherever you look in S.T.A.L.K.E.R, whether it's fields, swamps, or forests in autumn, or old Soviet facilities and living blocks, a distinct gloom is always present. Day or night, doesn't matter, it's there. In fact, it is this gloom that makes sitting around a campfire with fellow stalkers all the more cozy and memorable. Apart from the gloom in the visuals, you should see to transfer it to the soundtrack as well. Try to encourage your composer to keep the soundtrack more ambiental rather than bombastic. However, if you feel it's appropriate to add a bombastic soundtrack for an action scene, feel free to do so. Bonus points if the combat track matches the setting theme. Which reminds me, turn on the combat music in the game menu. Trust me, the composer Alexei Omelchuk knew what he was doing.
Okay, drop that retard.
Finally, make sure that nighttime in your setting actually feels like nighttime. Even if you are going with a more subtle horror vibe, trust me, the oppressive darkness of night can only help. Novelists, your best bet is once again to make sure there is a set of repeating descriptions that help sell the atmosphere. Fog, whispers, lightning, howling wind, whatever words help sell the gloomy, otherworldly atmosphere. My favorite trick is the repeat to shock method. This basically means that if, say, a fog is always present in your zone, you make sure to remind the audience that it's there almost every chapter, and other than being spooky, there's nothing special about it. Then, when you're ready, have something come out of the fog and attack, or better yet, have a character disappear in the fog. So let's sum this all up. First, make sure that your unknown zone is separated from the rest of the world, has its own rules of reality, and finally, has its own unique mystery. Second, if possible, try to establish a connection to our world. And finally, depending on what type of creator you are, make sure that it has the proper gloomy ambience through visuals and audio or proper repeating descriptions. Do this and the fans of your unknown zone will love you. Now, let's move on to... If the term Factional Exposition sounds familiar to you, it's probably because you watched my very first video in which I praised Gothic 1. To put it simply, Factional Exposition is when a creator, instead of dumping a wall of text on you or forcing you to read some codex, uses different factions to tell you about his world. From my personal experience, Gothic 1 was one of the first games to do this. Each of the three factions was there to allow the player to naturally learn more about the world and the setting of the game. Now, I'm about to piss off some hardcore Gothic fans, so here we go. Even though Gothic 1 has fully voiced NPCs that relay information about their communities in a natural, non-expository way, I still think S.T.A.L.K.E.R does Factional Exposition better. Yes, the NPCs in the first two games somehow look worse than Gothic 1's, which was released in 2001, and in Call of Pripyat they are barely better. Yes, they even sometimes have a literal wall of text for exposition, which I just criticized. But they have perspective.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Let me explain. In Gothic, everyone basically has two perspectives. We gotta escape. Or, it's so over, bro, just enjoy what we have here. In Stalker, apart from having more factions in total, we have perspectives like embrace and enjoy the zone, end the zone, exploit the zone for your own gain, use the zone as an escape from the real world, study and harness the power of the zone, and so on. On top of that, you also add things like factional warfare and factional engagement with the environment of the zone, and hopefully you can understand why I think Stalker has better factions. In simple terms, because Stalker gives us more perspectives from each faction and shows how they interact both with each other and the zone, I think its factional exposition beats Gothic's. Let's look at two faction examples. Freedom and Duty, the two most powerful factions in the zone and total polar opposites in their points of view. Duty sees the zone as something to be feared and to protect the outside world against. Any artifacts that they acquire are given to scientists rather than being sold on the black market outside the zone. Since most of their operations are about destroying monsters, a lot of normal stalkers sometimes owe them their lives when a duty patrol smokes a chimera. On the other side, we have Freedom. They believe the zone can't be controlled and should not be contained. Unlike, say, Duty and the military, they are against a monopoly of control in the zone and strive to share the zone's wonders and secrets with the rest of the world. Most of their members see themselves as explorers of the zone. Their patrols often collect data for research by making measurements of radiation background, temperature, humidity, the presence of monsters and anomalies, etc. While this attitude has caused them to butt heads with factions like Duty, it's also gained them a lot of powerful connections from suppliers outside the zone. These suppliers provide them with weapons, ammunition, and rations in exchange for artifacts. So when you see patrols in the zone from either of these groups, you don't even have to talk to them to understand what they're doing there. But if you do talk to some of them, their dialogue will reflect their faction's views. That was just two groups with interesting perspectives on the zone. I haven't even mentioned the reclusive ecologists or the mysterious mercs. Those secrets are for you to find. Lastly, I'd like to mention how knowing there's so many faction perspectives out there really makes each moment around the faction's campfire memorable. In Call of Pripyat, you even have an awesome neutral zone for all factions called Yanov Station, so if you want to learn a bit from each faction, that's where you go. Now, fantastic news for the lesson. Factional exposition is 100% universal, so no need to divide the lesson by creator type this time. It's also relatively simple. If you, as a screenwriter, game developer or novelist, have the urge to barf exposition out on your audience, consider this. Instead of forcing your audience to roll their eyes at your lore wank, how about, as a start, adding just one character who has one perspective from one faction? Then, slowly, as the story goes on, you introduce an additional character with an additional faction and an additional perspective. Bear in mind, these are not lore dump characters, they just offer a biased opinion and nothing more. A game designer can even go the extra mile and add unique questions to ask these NPCs to further learn more about their faction perspective. The end goal of these efforts is to make sure the audience learns about your world through natural, factional exposition rather than wall of text lore dumps. Best case scenario, your factions are really likable and your fans begin to argue amongst each other about which one is right. That's right, properly done factional exposition generates debate, and debate... Wait, no. I want to see if you've been paying attention. Write down in the comments why debates about the lore and story are important. I've got my fingers crossed for at least one correct answer. Now let's move on to... Oh yeah, Call of Pripyat goes there. It goes there hard. So, TMI as in too much information? Maybe, my videos are on the longer side. But no, the abbreviation stands for Total Mechanical Immersion. No fancy definitions this time. Let no developer claim ignorance as his excuse. As the name suggests, it is when a game studio goes all in on immersion on every single game level. No compromises, no pandering, and no immersion breaking in-game store bullshit. The only goal is immersing the player in the atmosphere, and holy shit did GSC Game World succeed. I'm about to say something that is going to piss off the Gothic fans in my audience, so here we go. Although Gothic 1 and 2 have better animations and quest design which help immersion, as far as visuals, sound and environmental design go, S.T.A.L.K.E.R Call of Pripyat blows Gothic 1 and 2 out of the water. Now hold on.
No, you hold on! Hold on to your head, cause you're going to be missing it soon! Die, traitor!
Don't get me wrong, the first two S.T.A.L.K.E.R games kill it with the atmosphere as well, especially Shadow of Chernobyl with its fateful recreation of what it's like to see a reaction YouTuber in person. Hey bro, I'm paying you in exposure. However, the quality of life improvements in Call of Pripyat, along with the more open world, are just peak S.T.A.L.K.E.R atmosphere for me. Let's break down Call of Pripyat's T.M.I properly. Oh, and I almost forgot, for the peak S.T.A.L.K.E.R atmosphere experience, use headphones. So first we have the general visuals of Call of Pripyat, and honestly they are the best in the entire trilogy. However, it's not because of the better looking graphics, although they do play a part. The main reason is the yellow, dark green and muddy color palette mixed with a spoon of darkness that gives every location that peak S.T.A.L.K.E.R look. Doesn't matter if it's open fields or abandoned industrial buildings, the peak S.T.A.L.K.E.R look is there. Next we have the sound design, and goddamn the composer did not miss a single beat. As mentioned, most of the soundtrack is ambiental, and when it combines with the visuals, it just takes you. Some people prefer to have these tracks going even during battle, but as I said, I'm really a fan of the combat music and always turn it on in the menu. Considering the combat OSTs have these dark industrial clank beats, I don't think they break the S.T.A.L.K.E.R atmosphere. Now the gunplay, you either love it or you hate it, but you can't deny it adds something to the tense atmosphere of the zone. However, there is a catch. If you play on the novice and S.T.A.L.K.E.R difficulties, the enemies will become bullet sponges, and so will you, and this breaks the immersion and the atmosphere. On the other hand, on veteran difficulty and especially on master, a headshot is a headshot for both you and the enemies. This ensures that no combat encounter is some shitty filler mob grind quest, but a tense battle for survival that helps you immerse yourself in the zone's atmosphere. A lot of people suggest going master difficulty because it helps the combat feel real and fast-paced, but I find that veteran has just the right amount of bullet sponginess not to be annoying, and the right amount of thrill from the master difficulty. Speaking of annoying things, stupid dog! Whether you have a mission or are just wandering the zone, you will encounter the local wildlife, and it is so goddamn good. This is another reason why I love Call of Pripyat. It has a bestiary with 2 extra enemy types, added along with all the mutants from the previous titles. Oh, and if you think all these enemies are just generic bullet sponges, you've got another thing coming. Whether it's trying to figure out the real pseudo-dog from amongst its illusions, using cover to kill a burr before it rips your gun from your hands, or constantly moving before you get mauled by a chimera, you will need to adapt your tactics based on what type of enemy you are facing. Considering that you learn how to fight some of these enemies directly from NPCs, the Stalker bestiary and tactics are another massive plus to immersion. What I especially love about Call of Pripyat is that you have instances in which you know there is no way you can beat a monster encounter, so you rely on the environment and hope for the best. One of my favorite instances of this is sneaking through a lair of sleeping bloodsuckers, or as people outside the zone call them, reaction units. Now, I'm not gonna lie, although Call of Pripyat has the best side quests in the Stalker trilogy, they are still subpar compared to the other titles in the industry. However, it is the world's reaction and rewards to these quests that make them truly great. Call of Pripyat has its own version of the reactive reward system from Mask of the Betrayer. Although smaller in scope, it nevertheless feels great. You see, if you complete some of the tougher side quests that make life in the zone easier for stalkers, you don't get just an achievement and a few NPC comments. You get tangible, in-game rewards placed in your stash by other stalkers. These aren't throwaway rewards either, but valuable medical supplies, ammo, and sometimes even weapons and armor. I can't tell you how great for immersion this is. Not only is the world naturally reacting to your deeds, but you also feel appreciated and part of the Stalker community, rather than an outsider protagonist. Let's check the stash today. Oh yeah, the Americans will really love this one. Speaking of stashes, they are another immersive, if sometimes annoying mechanic in Stalker. In short, after completing quests or just helping a fellow stalker out, you will receive coordinates to their secret stashes all over the zone. The rewards from these stashes range from regular stalker supplies to downright game-changing weapons and armor, so it's always worth checking them out. The reason I said they are sometimes annoying is because some stalker assholes put their stashes in dangerous anomalies, or worse, atop trees. However, stashes aren't the only rewards in anomalies. The anomalies provide us with arguably the defining feature of the Stalker experience: artifact hunting. As already mentioned, artifacts are the byproduct of the noosphere distortion that affects the entire zone. Each artifact possesses some kind of reality-breaking property that's not only immersive story-wise, but gameplay-wise as well. Using your trusty scanner, screws, and a bit of wit, you can grab these bad boys and sell them to the local stalker bartender Beard for a good price. While lower tier artifacts can be sold for a decent price, higher tier artifacts can go from 10 to 20,000 rubles per artifact.
Each.
Yes! Hell yeah! Hey, come on, baby! Come on! Yes! Come on! Yes!
Alternatively, you can keep the artifacts yourself, in special compartments in your stalker suit. Depending on the artifact, you can get better protection from anomalies, decreased carry weight, increased health and stamina regeneration, take your pick. However, be careful, as most of the artifacts produce a certain amount of radiation, which needs to be countered with artifacts that absorb radiation. This balancing of artifacts greatly helps immersion, as it reminds you that even when you are using the zone's power, there is a price to pay. Speaking of the zone's power, it's time to finally talk about the emissions.
Attention, stalkers. An emission will start any minute now. Find cover if you want to live. Is a safe area. Holster your weapon.
I'm listening.
If you watched my first video on Gothic, you'll remember how I praised the Orc War as a great ongoing background event, or OBE. Properly implemented OBEs give that much needed spice to a setting's lore, and trigger debate among fans. Now, the emissions in Call of Pripyat aren't as complex or evolving as an entire war going on in the story's background. However, they are mysterious enough to constantly keep the audience guessing about the nature of the setting. Although they only leave the background for a few moments, holy shit are they a fantastic minor OBE that, when taking center stage, just enthralls you in the zone's atmosphere. That about covers the major components of Call of Pripyat's T.M.I, but there are other pluses worth mentioning as well. For example, the Factional Exposition I mentioned earlier is supported by actual in-game interaction between the NPCs and the environment. You can see stalkers patrolling the zone, fighting the mutants, fighting each other, scanning the anomalies, and finally, resting at a cozy campfire and sharing stories. When you take everything I mentioned above and then add this NPC interaction with the world, you get what I'd call a cozy gloom. Yeah, that's a good name for it. This cozy gloom is best felt when around a campfire with other stalkers. You both had a rough day in the zone, and now you rest, chat, and enjoy some traditional Slavic cuisine. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. There are also missions where you get to take part in this faction interaction, and well, let's just say as a Balkan man, I love how much these missions remind me of home.
What have you got? Show me. Look, we've got these here artifacts, and we can get more of them. In exchange, we're looking for weapons and some good equipment.
You know that I've got whatever Duty's got, so weapons and equipment are not a problem. All my stuff is top quality, no doubt about it.
Well, that clears things up. Take them down.
One last thing I'd like to mention that helps you feel like a stalker and part of the zone is the latter half of the main story. You, as badass Major Degtyarev, need to gather a crew so that you can pass through an underground complex and reach the city of Pripyat. Although the companions you take are always the same, the quests you do to get them are great and really make you feel like a stalker doing a favor for a favor. When everyone's been gathered, you all stand before this giant mechanical door as you prepare to face the mutated horrors of the zone's underground together. I have to say this is one of my favorite moments in the Stalker trilogy.
Neću da budem samo faca u gužvi, ti ćeš čuti moj glas kada viknem to glasno. Život moj je sad ili nikad.
Although often overlooked, the power curve of Stalker, especially Call of Pripyat, is a great immersive element. Like in Gothic, you start out fairly weak, and as you grow in power, you eventually overcome the obstacles you couldn't beat at lower levels. However, Call of Pripyat has an immersive catch. There are no levels. The power curve entirely depends on what you do with the money you earn. If you don't buy better gear, then the tougher enemies will tear you apart no matter how far into the game you are. I can't tell you how much I love this, not only because it's more realistic and adds to the immersion, but because if you play smart and get good gear early on, the game recognizes your work as you tear apart your enemies way sooner than you should have. For example, if I had done this quest to free Stalker Mitai with the starting or mid-game gear, I would have had a much tougher time. But since I use my money well, Oh, and of course you can also upgrade this gear. All you need is money, the proper tools, and lots of vodka.
Here's to our common goal.
As far as how to get this gear early on, all I'm going to say is talk to Stalker Nimble. The rest is up to you. Lastly, I'd like to mention the immersive way Call of Pripyat handles fast travel. A lot of games just resort to opening a map and clicking on the destination. Not Call of Pripyat. You have to find stalker guides who are more experienced in exploring the zone and pay them to take you where you want to go. You can even lower the price of these guides by getting them info on better routes. Wow, that was a lot to cover, but hey, Call of Pripyat deserves all the praise it can get. Oh, I almost forgot. If you want to see an awesome video that dove even deeper into what makes Stalker special, I highly recommend How Stalker Became Immortal by S.T.A.L.K.E.R Costumes. The video link will be in the description. Give them a like, sub, and warm regards from the temple. Alright, let's get to the lessons. Now, when you hear the term total mechanical immersion, you think that's a lesson only for game designers. Wrong. In fact, we are going to start with novelists and screenwriters first. When it comes to creating immersive visuals and audio, two things are of utmost importance: the formula and team cohesion. If you start your project without a set formula, you shoot yourself in the foot right away. A clear vision is needed for immersion to be achieved. For example, let's take a look at Call of Pripyat and Stalker's formula in general. Yellow, green, brown, and dark gray color palette, plus mostly ambiental soundtrack, plus unnatural weather effects, equals Stalker atmosphere through visuals and audio. The second part is equally as important. You have to make sure everyone who is helping you understands the formula. For example, make sure that as a novelist, the person doing your book cover understands what type of story it is. You don't want some goofy cover for your serious fantasy novel. Screenwriters and directors don't bring in a composer at the last minute and be like, "Yeah, compose me some epic shit, bro." No matter how good they are, if they don't understand you, the contrast between the movie and soundtrack will break immersion. Just like a game developer, you can create an entire bestiary or archive of enemies specific to your setting. Make sure that the characters in your story have multiple ways to handle each enemy and that there is unique lore for each hostile entity. This not only helps immersion, but sparks debate among the fans. Now here's something that can really help people get immersed in your work. Have a unique item that can only be found in a specific setting. A magical mineral, reality-bending artifacts, ancient technology, whatever gives the story's characters a material incentive to be there. Humans are driven by materialism, especially in today's society, so you can't go wrong with this immersive step. If you have multiple factions in your setting, make sure that the characters can see interaction between them. It's such a waste of potential when you have cool factions that are just set dressing for the story. Ideally, have members from each faction help the characters of the story, so that both they and the audience feel more connected to the setting. And finally, novelists, screenwriters, trust me on this, have one unstoppable force of nature ongoing background event in your setting. Nothing helps sell the setting and the characters like hiding from some unstoppable force of nature that you just kind of have to wait out. For example, the same way people hide from tornadoes in real life, they can hide from your smaller orb that occasionally strikes your setting. Cowering in tight spaces in fear of the outside is one of the most immersive human experiences. Now finally, let's get to the game designers. Apart from being able to apply all the lessons mentioned above, game designers have a few extra immersion tools at their disposal. For one, if you're feeling ballsy, you can remove the leveling system in your game.
Heresy!
I know, heresy, but listen. The reason leveling systems exist is because of a designer's need for certainty. Most designers are scared of players breaking their game, of breaking their precious power curve. However, if you want to achieve greater immersion, the freedom to break the game is something you should give your players. Just like in real life, if you obtained powerful anti-ballistic armor and a gun, you'd have advantage over those who don't have it. To put it simply, instead of a leveling power curve, feel free to implement a gear-based power curve. Be completely comfortable with the player finding a great weapon and breezing through the rest of the game. If they had fun and were immersed, you did your job as a developer. As for specific plot items that can be found in your setting, make sure they affect the player in some way. Ideally, there should be a balancing system for pros and cons like in Call of Pripyat. But please, for the love of God, no +1 to attack generic power items. Whatever these specific plot items you have are, make sure the player's gameplay experience is changed by them somehow. For example, acquiring a magical lens that lets players see hidden doors they might have missed otherwise. Lastly, make exploration feel rewarding. You can use stashes like stalkers or simply cool undiscovered locations. You'd be surprised just how much people are more easily immersed when they know there's a reward in it for them. I mean, just think about it. The player sees that you applied all the lessons above, from atmosphere to a minor but unstoppable orb, and then on top of all that, they know they'll discover something cool in the environment. I honestly can't see how they won't be immersed in your setting. Phew, that was certainly a lot to cover, but hey, a small price to pay for total mechanical immersion. Now let's move on to...
So, did you find anything out about Magpie?
I've asked everywhere, but it's useless. Nobody knows a thing. It's like he's a poltergeist or something.
That son of a bitch is going to regret running away. Hang in there, buddy. The doc said you'll be up on your feet in a couple of days. You might as well use this time to rest up and chill.
Yeah, it's gonna take more than rest to fix these mistakes, buddy. So far all I've done is praise Call of Pripyat, but just like anything that's beautiful in Slavic culture, it has a problematic side. For example, we have the issue of the intro. What, suka, Call of Pripyat has the best intro in the entire series, bleh. Yes it does, but the problem is that the hype it builds up just disappears. I'm talking seconds after the intro is done.
The government decides to launch a large-scale military operation. Operation Fairway, as it came to be known, involves using maps of anomaly fields to maneuver helicopters to the CNPP. Despite meticulous preparation, the operation is a failure, and none of the helicopters return from the mission. Major Degtyarev, a USS special agent, is sent into the zone to investigate the disappearance of the helicopters. Disguised as a stalker, equipped with a regular assault rifle, 2 weeks' worth of supplies, and a radio to communicate with HQ, the Major begins his journey towards
Fuck
the
yeah!
center
Idemo
of the
Majora
zone.
Degtyarev! Okay. Now I hear some of you say, well of course the hype dies down after the intro, man. It's supposed to then build up towards the end of the game. But that's just it. The hype never again reaches this peak. In fact, there are no hype-building story cinematics until the very end of the game, which is a shame since GSC obviously knows how to do it. It would have been great if we got this slide narration with epic music during key moments in the story. That would have kept the hype going throughout the entire game. Without these pauses for epic music and narration, I think to some people the story can kind of feel absent, stagnant, or weak. I don't mind this per se since the atmosphere draws me in so much, and again, as a Slav, I can't help but feel welcomed in the world and story. This is especially true when I see references to things like Bosnia. However, a non-Slavic person who's more used to westernized story pacing might lose motivation to finish the game. It also doesn't help that you're just kind of dropped in after the intro with the attitude, hey, you played the previous games, right? You know what to do. Now, I don't personally mind this hands-off approach. Gothic 1 functions very much the same. However, the key difference is that Gothic 1 is, well, Gothic 1, and Call of Pripyat is the third installment in the series. What I mean is, if Call of Pripyat is going to be your first game in the Stalker series, you're gonna have a hard time adjusting as opposed to those who already know the mechanics. Thankfully, that's only in the beginning, and Call of Pripyat ditched some of the, less beginner-friendly mechanics of the previous title. This is why I'm still standing by my opinion that, at least gameplay-wise, Call of Pripyat is the most accessible game in the trilogy. Now let's move on to the protagonist himself. Fellow Stalkers, I know I'm about to piss off most of you, but Major Degtyarev is my favorite Stalker protagonist. Don't get me wrong, S.T.A.L.K.E.R is great. However, the Major is literally the "be the Slav the Americans think you are" meme, especially in the accent.
2 bodies. Looks like they died in the crash. Everything of value has been looted and the onboard computer has been wiped clean. But the black box is still intact. Interesting. I reckon a decent technician will be able to extract the information on it and decode it.
The reason he's in the lessons from failure section is precisely that he is by far the coolest Stalker protagonist, and yet there is almost zero character building. The only arc present here is the one Major Degtyarev makes in the air after he steps on a mine. I mean, sure, you could say that he's just a soldier on a mission to the zone, and that's all the info we need. But come on, that is lazy and you know it. We have this military badass stepping into the zone for the very first time, and he has no comments on anything other than the mission itself? I swear, I would not have put this issue here if at the very least we had one scene where Major Degtyarev talks about either the zone, his past, or at the very least why he took the mission. To be fair, in the end slides it is implied that the zone had a permanent effect on him, but again, in the ending slides, not during the actual game. What about the place that's literally in the title of the game? Well, Pripyat is disappointing. Yes, immersion-wise it can make sense that an irradiated city so close to the heart of the zone is mostly empty. However, when you consider what kind of places the Stalkers have made their home in the zone, this excuse does not hold up. The mission before you enter Pripyat is epic, as you and your crew make your way through irradiated and monster-infected tunnels to reach this ominous city. However, that only makes the empty environments of Pripyat all the more disappointing. Some will argue, well, there you go, Okwals. Pripyat was not accessible before because of the irradiated and monster-infected tunnels. However, we see both S.T.A.L.K.E.R and nearly every Stalker faction swarm Pripyat near the end of Shadow of Chernobyl, so obviously this is not the only way into the city. There is just no excuse lore-wise for Pripyat being this empty. Don't get me wrong, it probably has the strongest choking isolation atmosphere in the series, but it comes at too high a price. That's not to say that there are no quests at all in Pripyat. The few that are there are great. It's actually really neat to show how much the military isn't prepared for the dangers of the zone, compared to the Stalkers.
No! What the hell is that? Wait! We're all dead. Help! Someone help me! Get that thing away from me! No!
Recon unit, come in. What is going on out there? We need to find the recon unit. Major, find out what happened. What the hell? You be careful out there, okay? And Major, keep me posted.
Oh no, the controller is making him watch the Acolyte. Hang on, brother, I'm coming! However, the fact that these quests are great only makes that feeling of damn, we should have had more of this even worse. Yes, GSC, not having a cancerous amount of hostile NPCs in the final zone was the correct choice. But I think you might have gone a bit too far in the opposite direction. The final mission where you and the military evacuate Pripyat is also great. The tension and hype as you fight your way through a Pripyat swarming with mutants and monolith temporarily fixes the emptiness problem. The evacuation begins here, while the first enemies charge at you from here as you make your way along the evacuation path here. Then, as abruptly as it begins, Call of Pripyat ends. Credit where credit is due, the ending slides are great, as they recognize various choices you made during the game. The slides are also accompanied by one of my favorite ending soundtracks in gaming. Seriously, this is how it sounds when you get the good ending in life. There are some smaller disappointments outside of Pripyat worth mentioning as well. For example, as immersive as a lot of the quests are, there are some painfully slow ones. The quest where you have to scan anomalies while every single mutant in the zone converges on your location to murder the scientist stalkers you are guarding is just awful. Although the companions are interesting, I think there should have been more quests to flesh out their backstories, thus making the team up for Pripyat 1 all the more impactful. Lastly, while the NPCs are great for factional exposition and immersion, a lot of them have just 1 to 2 lines of dialogue or use wall of text exposition with no voice acting. If not for the interesting factional perspectives, this would have been a bigger problem. Now let's see what we can learn from the failures of Call of Pripyat. The good news is that the failures are pretty universal, which means the lessons are as well. Whether you're a game designer, novelist, or screenwriter, maintaining a sense of hype and anticipation throughout your story is a must, especially if you had a great intro. As I said, you can do this by having chapter summaries at certain points in the game, like Witcher 3 for example. The goal is to remind the audience that they are part of a story that needs to be finished, and that a great payoff awaits at the end. Speaking of payoff, if you're going to have a place that you tease throughout your entire story, a place that's literally in the title, for God's sake, make sure it lives up to the expectations. At the very least, ensure that it's not empty and gives the audience the impression you kinda gave up. Story revelations, unique creatures or factions, special plot items, add whatever you can to make the last location in your story feel special. If you're short on time and just can't develop it, scribble together some unique lore the audience has never heard before, and give them something to debate about. Lastly, make sure the ending sequence is properly developed, and doesn't have a sudden cutoff point. God forbid ending a long-running story with a fade to black. For example, Gothic 2's final location is also a bit of a letdown. However, because of the unique design of the place, and some lore hints as to its true purpose in the world, it didn't feel like it was completely empty, or an afterthought for the developers. Another thing is making sure that, if you add a badass protagonist to your story, the audience has a chance to learn a bit more about them. Yes, having a cool accent or abilities that make them badass is fine, but if there's nothing else, you risk having a one-note character. Have some personal storyline of the protagonist that runs parallel to the main story. It can be a unique mission in your setting that eventually comes up. At the very least, have the badass protagonist express some opinion on the setting they found themselves in. Again, I have to point to Geralt from Witcher 3 and his comments during chapter transitions or during quests. Additionally, if you are trying to immerse your audience in your setting through the activities of the protagonist or side characters, make sure they are not a drag. There always needs to be a balance between immersion and respecting the audience's time. This goes double for novelists who think they have all the time in the world since they are writing an epic fantasy series. Finally, if you're going to use factional exposition in your story, apart from having unique factional perspectives, make sure the members of these factions have as much nuance as possible. Ideally, 2 to 3 unique lines of dialogue can go a long way. That's it for the lessons from failure. Now it's time for... So those would be the lessons from my favorite Stalker game. One that, despite its flaws, I think offers the best, most immersive experience in the series. Although it probably has the weakest story in the entire trilogy, the massive gameplay and setting improvements make up for that, and I really think it's a must-play experience for any gamer. Especially for Slavs.
Crazy hamburger! Crazy hamburger! This is horrible!
If you're a creator who wants to make a story about a mysterious setting in their world that breaks the rules of reality, I really think Call of Pripyat represents a great set of guidelines to follow. Call of Pripyat is available for a great price on GOG, and often there is a huge discount where you can get it for like 4 or 5 euros. Throughout this video you heard me address creators, and I don't blame you for not paying close attention if you're not one yourself. However, these lessons are meant to be learned by both creators and audiences. All you have to do as an audience member is know the theory. Creators do the heavy lifting by putting it into practice. However, I hear you say, but why do I have to know this? I'm not a creator, I'm here to enjoy myself and nothing else. Well, if modern entertainment has taught us anything, it is that the audience's sense for quality has been dulled. That's why a lot of bullshit artists have been allowed to take over some of the most prolific IPs, banking on the dulled senses of the masses. But here at the temple we say,
not one more. That's what we can do. Here, today. It ends with us.
Change comes through awareness and knowledge. Even if the creators applied all these lessons to perfection, it means little if no one is there to notice. So heed these words, my beautiful audience members, and let entertainment be saved through your knowledge. What you need to do is simple. Identify, appreciate, and support creators who provide you with mysterious settings in which you can't help but get immersed. Identify an unknown zone. Appreciate the use of T.M.I. And finally, support creators who make sure their in-game locations live up to the hype. In a world in which quality storytelling is highly valued, people live more enlightened lives. They see themselves, their loved ones, and the world in a better light. Looks like that's it for our time in the zone, though we might come back in the future to check out some anomalies. My next video is going to be about a game that I never asked for, but boy am I grateful I found it. Once again you made the long climb to my home and made it come to life with your presence, and once again I'm eternally grateful. In time, I hope a lot of you will choose to stay at the temple with me, to help me activate some of its dormant functions. Feel free to like, comment and subscribe, as it helps with the upkeep of the temple, and helps those who are still climbing find their way here. Have a safe path down the mountain, and I'll see you next time in the temple.